In this video, we continue on with the create table statement, and on this one we're going to add a not null constraint to our columns and do some experiments to see what the result of that, of adding that constraint is. Before we do that, we need to talk about what does null mean. Now, you'll notice I added a column here that they haven't been in other videos called hair color. I've inserted John Zimmerman, and it has a null marker right here. And sometimes you'll hear me say null value. That's actually inaccurate, because what null means is absence of a value. There is nothing there. So it's not zero. It's not like an empty string. It's just an absence of a value. And nulls can be problematic because it can have two meanings. So for instance, is this null, it's missing a value, is it because we simply haven't asked the question yet? So we currently don't have the answer. Or is it null because John Zimmerman happens to be bald as a cue ball, right? He has no hair, so he has no hair color. Another example I've run across is, let's say we have a column called pregnancy, yes, no. We're just looking for a yes, no answer. So if you have a null value, and there I said it again, a null marker in that column, is it because we haven't asked the question, or is it because it doesn't apply? Maybe I have a male patient, and so asking whether somebody's pregnant is not appropriate. For that reason, there's people out there in the database world that argue you should design your databases such that you have very few, if any, null markers in your data. If you end up with a column or an attribute that has a lot of null values, like null markers, then is there a way to design it so you don't have that? There are other people who argue that it's impossible to do that, and so it's a fact of life that occasionally you'll have null markers in your data. Later in the quarter, we'll learn how to handle null values, but recognize they're problematic because I can't compare things. When I say, show me two people who have the same hair color and you're trying to compare to something that's null, remember, null is there is no data there, so I can't compare. When you try to do math, I have a column called discount, and I have one called price, and I want to multiply price times discount. Well, if there's a null value in the discount column, well then the math is null. It's an absence of a value. It doesn't mean zero. So having said all that, how do I prevent null values from appearing in my data? Well, you add not null next to the column definition. So just for consistency's sake, I'm going to take out my hair color example. And what I've put up here is a not null. Let me zoom in right here. So it's just, you simply add the words not null right after the column definition. There's no comma, just a space, two words, and then of course after every column you put a comma. By adding the words not null, you're making this a required field. So basically, anytime somebody tries to add an employee to this table, they have to put in their first name and last name, and if they don't fill in those values, well then the system will raise an error. Say, whoops, you have to put in first name and last name. So on real databases, more often than not, your fields are going to be not null. You want all your fields to be required. Okay, when I'm experimenting and just playing around by inserting data and deleting and just running tests, I will leave a lot of things not null just because I get tired of filling in every field all the time. I just want to be able to put in a couple of names and do a quick little test. But again, in real databases, probably most of your fields will be not null. So let's go ahead and drop our table and then recreate it. And we'll insert some data and see what happens. So that worked. Now, remember, two ways to insert data. You list the columns or you don't list them. Here I didn't list them, which means I have to fill in every value. Well, so I have a first and last name, which are going to be required because it's not null. What if I don't know John's salary, or he doesn't have one, or for whatever I'm adding him and I just don't want to put in the salary? Well, I can't leave that field empty, right? Because the system is expecting I'll get an error message basically. So when I run that, down here, column count doesn't match value count, right? So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 columns, And over here, I only have 7 values. So I have to do something for salary. But remember, the point is, I don't know what it is. So then you use the word null to insert something there. And of course, so let me go ahead and run that. Now it took it. And now when I select that value, John's salary is lack of value. There's a null marker sitting there. Okay. Watch what happens here. I'm listing the last name in the salary column. I'm going to enter this Casey name. So I select that. I should get an error because first name is required. So there you go. Field first name doesn't have a default value. Without a default value, which we'll talk about in another video, I get an error because I have 2 required fields. Because they're required, I have to list the first name, comma, I have to list that column, and then I have to put a value there. So now when I run it, I'll run both those commands at once. I get Jennifer Casey, I get a green check, I don't get an error. And so that's what not null does for you. It becomes a required field.